Welcome back to the Ranting Diva Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and today is all about how to calculate your potential earnings if you find a job posting online that you think you may be interested in. So when I was recording my last episode, I talked a lot about in that episode the cost of living and specifically the cost of living where I live, and just showing and highlighting if you had certain responsibilities or certain bills that would be due, within a specific time frame, how challenging that is, even if you do have very minimal bills and very minimal expenses. And in doing that earlier, I kind of thought to myself that surely somebody has a calculator out there where you could potentially calculate what your earnings would be if you were looking for a job. And pretty much since COVID, I've been looking for a job. It's been a rough road, let's just say that. And so I was on just kind of doing some browsing this morning, and I kept finding just, again, very ridiculous job posts, which that seems to be pretty par for the course these days. I don't really see any that, for the most part, have what I would say is a reasonable pay rate. And these are not necessarily entry-level jobs. A lot of the jobs I'm looking for are more administrative or clerical, things in that nature. So we're not talking about, and I'm not meaning to demean anybody, but we're not talking about working at McDonald's or, working at TJ Maxx. Like, we're talking about a little bit more elevated jobs that require a certain skill set. But it is astounding to me, even where I live, even with the cost of living where I live, it is astounding to me how little most of these people pay. And, if you're lucky enough to even get a range or a ballpark that they give you, because a lot of them either will just say nothing or they give like a really broad generic range where you have no idea what the hell it's actually going to be. So I decided, somebody out there has to have some sort of tool where if you plugged in, 40 hours at $14 an hour, what does that equal as far as bring home pay? Because, people talk all the time about, the gross salary is expected to be this, but that, to me, that means nothing because that's not what I'm actually banking. That's before tax, before anything. So I did find a really cool tool actually through ADP, and I'll link it down below on the notes in not the comment section, but in the notes section. And so it is a really awesome tool where you can actually go so far as to put in your county, your state, and based on that, based on the current rates for federal income tax, Medicare, Social Security, all those different things, it will tell you exactly what you're going to be bringing home. And so, for instance, I this morning there was a job posting I saw where they said 12 to 14 an hour, which I thought was completely ridiculous. It was for a law firm downtown in the city I live in, and it was for a admin clerical assistant. And I just thought, first of all, that was completely ridiculous. And second of all, I thought, God, what does that actually end up translating to after tax and everything? Well, even if we went down the middle, because it said 12 to 14, so even if we went down the middle and said $13 an hour, that only ends up being $433.15 a week. So that's $433.15. And I just thought that is just unbelievable. I mean, absolutely astounding on so many levels. So, I guess I just, again, much like my last podcast I did, I never really had put a pencil to it. And, as I've been job searching, I'm realizing like I may have to take something that, gives me a lot less money. But then it's a matter of how much farther can I cut, especially on months like this month where I'm going to be paying property tax. So there's not going to be a tremendous amount left over after all bills are paid. And, granted, I do have, a decent nest egg in the bank, but it's just, again, it's the principle behind it. And it's the principle behind the fact that so many of these employers think that somehow this is doable, somehow this is livable, and as I mentioned in my previous podcast, The going rent in my city is around $1,000 for a 1-bedroom. That's pretty much the starting point. And there's not really anything that's less than that as far as a 1-bedroom. Now, of course, you could get a studio, and depending on what side of town, it might be slightly less, slightly more, depending on where you end up landing. But all in all, you're not really walking away with anything that's less than $1,000, and which is insanity to me. So here again, I started doing the math and using just $13 just for this particular example. At $433 a week, if we do $433, 15 on a 4-week month, your bring home is only $1,700. Well, when rent is $1,000, I mean, there's just no way in hell that that's doable. So here again, I think there's just a lot of people that don't really think about these things, and I mean, I have lots of thoughts, and I'll get into some of them in a later podcast episode, but the fact of the matter is, when you see a job posting and you see a low number or even a higher number, I would highly encourage you to take the time and calculate that out. See what that actual number is going to end up being, because chances are you're going to be pretty surprised, and probably not in a good way, as to what that final number really is going to be. Because, even for me, as I mentioned in my last podcast, even for me, after all bills are paid, I'm not banking a lot, and in terms of, trying to save and trying to continue building up that nest egg. So that being said, especially for people that are in a partnership or have kids or whatever their unique situation is, this is just not doable. And so here again, I hope that this, tool is of some benefit to you. And again, I'll link it down below. But, definitely as you're doing a job search, make sure that you are taking the time to calculate that, because I think you'll be surprised at what those numbers really end up being at the end of the day. So thanks again for listening. I'll probably do another podcast maybe in the next week or so. I've got several different topics I want to, cover, but for now, this is what I have for this one, and stay tuned. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, and if you like my content, please tell somebody, and be sure to share some of my tips, and I'll be posting more content like this that's about finance, about overconsumption, mental health, just a variety of topics, and specifically aimed at millennials, since that's my generation. But if you like any of those topics or any of those themes, let me know, and we'll go from there. So stay tuned, and until next time, have a great day.